Hi, welcome to another Travels with Trish. This episode, I'm visiting Witney Antiques in England to talk with the owner, Rebecca Scott, about the exhibition of a rare set of 17th century embroidery. It really took me by surprise. I've been an embroiderer since I was little, and I now teach and research embroidery with an emphasis on unusual materials or techniques and the lives of the professionals and stitchers behind them. In the past, I was able to take several groups of stitchers and students to exhibitions and museums to see embroidery through my eyes with my network of experts, but it is always limited to those who could fit on the bus or in the back room. But through this series, I hope to bring embroideries into your home without having to travel or inspire you to go see some of these embroideries yourself. I've been quite a few places in the world in the last year and have built up a bunch of footage that I hope you will enjoy. This latest one is related to several books that have come out, and those are by Witney Antiques. So last year, this wonderful book, I Write the Needle's Praise, Century of Sampler Making, 1630 to 1730s, was done as the first, pretty much the first of a 17th century exhibit, which is going to go over 3 years. I mean, 3 years of material. It's amazing. And it is an amazing book. It has an amazing amount of samplers in it, and they were all on the walls. This year, the exhibition was on a particular set of family embroideries, and this is the book. It is in the shop at the moment until it runs out. It's hopefully getting close to running out, because that's wonderful, so we can get more and more books going. But Rebecca Scott, who is the owner of Witney Antiques, her mother and father had started it. The Jarretts, they were lovely people. I had several visits. Once we were in a pub after I had gone and visited a particular piece of embroidery that they let me photograph because it was related to the Plymouth jacket. We were in a pub and with my brother and them, and I got to hear lots of stories of Rebecca's father as an adventurer, and he just kept us rolling for an hour. But family business, Witney Antiques, and Rebecca has been doing casket research like myself, as well as 17th century samplers, like the band samplers, the whitework samplers research. And she's pouring all of that into the catalogs. This one, which was last year, 2022, this one, which is 2023, and then the 2024 one, where she's working with Isabella Rosner on the research for these 3 books. So what had happened was that Rebecca had been contacted by the family of Elizabeth Hall. So Rebecca was able to purchase this casket by Elizabeth Hall, which includes inside of it an enormous number of additional pieces of embroidery by herself and other members of the family, and also connect through extensive research that she and Isabella Rosner have done, other girls, other samplers that she happens to have to the school where Elizabeth was attending. So this is a magnificent volume, partially because a trove of family papers came with it. And that is like liquid gold for those of us who are doing research on this time period. So I visited, I had to of course go, I absolutely just had to go and see this casket and get of course my own copy of the book, as well as see all of the extra pieces that were in the exhibition for this year, many of which were the beautiful samplers that you see in this particular volume. And I asked Rebecca if it would be okay to interview her, because it just so happened to be that when I got there, there was nobody else in this shop. And I asked her what her favorite parts of the exhibition she had put together was, and tell me some stories about it. Now, this is probably some of my first videography, so please be gentle with me. You can imagine if there are maybe 100 samplers on the wall. Maybe I'm exaggerating, I don't know, but there was a lot of pieces in that exhibition. And so I may have been doing this kind of a thing, as you can tell a few times. I think I may have cut her head off every once in a while. But what she's talking about and the pieces show up, and I'm sure that there's, maybe as I drift over to some other sampler, you'll be excited about that. But I think it was a fun time to hear what Rebecca herself had to say about Elizabeth Hall's casket and some of her favorite pieces in the ensemble. So enjoy. And if you like this, please subscribe.
Elizabeth Hall's Garters.
Yeah.
Okay,
You'll have to excuse my phone going off. And the two surviving Quaker sort of plaited or finger braided objects, the Rebecca Eggleton girdle and the Martha Downs cane string, or the Hannah Downs cane string. They're both worked by them as adults.
Right.
And so I think it's been assumed that these were the work of older women, or women just pre-marriage. But these aren't. These are worked at school, and they're definitely worked at school because in 1685, Elizabeth's mum remarries, and so her initials change. So we know, because the initials are included on this, that these are worked while she's still at school and sent to her. And that kind of intimacy not between an adult woman and her future spouse or her spouse, but between Elizabeth Hall and her mother. And that is something which kind of changes the way that you look at, especially something as intimate as a garter.
Right.
That these women, we kind of think of them as being really repressed and not having...
I agree with what you're saying, what you're about ready to say. Yes.
And yet she's sending this incredibly intimate object or garters to her mother.
Yeah.
And clearly they weren't, she didn't wear them, obviously.
Right.
But it's just, this isn't about repression. No. This is about being very open.
Yes.
And I don't think that Quakers that's not how we've ever thought about them.
No, it isn't. And I agree with you 100% that this is not the learning to mend. This is not the, keeping them in their place.
No.
This is a totally different
totally
thing.
Different.
Totally different thing.
And I think
yes.
I think actually all of the objects in the exhibition, but again in all the other suites that exist, or that we know of so far that exist, just push those boundaries of how we think about those girls, and that's, for me, that's been the joy of it.
I think we're saying the same thing, but from a different perspective.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's so much closer, so much more of the personality of the soul of the maker comes out in them, and I think that's and when you look at, so here we've got Elizabeth Hall's casket. And up to now, I think it's probably only the second of this type entirely covered in wrapped cards that we know. I'm saying that, no, that's not true. There are other caskets wrapped with card wrap, but not in quite this form. So the fact that this is not identical, but absolutely the same construction, and the same use of materials and the same skill sets going into it as Hannah Downs' casket, is the two of them back each other up as to the history of the girls.
Now the notes there, are those contemporaneous? I haven't had a chance to read them.
So,
or are they later additions by the family?
So looking at the writing of them, the first note here, Elizabeth Hall, afterwards Collinson, the needlework of the cabinet and contents were her work when a girl, supposed about the year 1681 to 1683 at Shacklewell School. That is written, we believe, by her son-in-law. By her grandson-in-law. and so around about 1720-ish. And I think that of the whole suite, that's another point of real interest, that the little slips which accompany it, various of the objects, are written and recorded very early on in the suite's descent.
Right.
So it's kind of quite unusual, I would suggest, that a son or a grandson is explaining to the next generation that this was his grandmother's work. Right. So there's this enormous pride, enormous family pride. The beads that were found in the casket, we know that that's written by Jacob Bell, that note. And so again, that's written in about in the 1720s, perhaps 1730s. So it's this whole idea of passing objects on, not just tells us that these weren't objects made for sale or for, these were objects to keep.
But they were, right.
And it's not really what you would expect in a Quaker household, because after all, they are not supposed to be enjoying these sorts of very frivolous, very decorative objects, but they clearly are, and they're clearly keeping them. And then and as it goes on, actually, it just gets fancier and fancier and fancier. So, until you get to the very end of the 18th century, and then suddenly it reins back a little bit,
very much so.
and you get that sort of very definite Quaker style.
It's like the internal turmoil is done.
Yeah, and also, I mean, in this case, it also reflects a change in socioeconomic position.
Status, yeah. So the box, the pieces inside here, and is that the entire suite, or is there more?
So the box came with these 4 objects, not the bellows purse in the centre, but these 4 objects were all in the box, and we believe them to have been worked by Elizabeth Hall, with the exception of the bellows purse, which we are not sure whether it was worked by Elizabeth or whether it was worked by a classmate and given to her, or whether she worked it to give to somebody else, because it has the initials SF.
I see.
But certainly the wheatears, the pen holder, the garters, the beads, we know were hers because there's a note. The nutmegs, again. And then the strawberry purse, which I'm not sure whether it was worked by her, whether it was worked by her at school or whether it's worked slightly later. I don't know. The silver purse.
That's hers as well?
That's hers, yeah. And then what we believe to be either her daughter or her Jacob Bell's wife, who comes in slightly later on. We move on to these objects.
So it's an entire, more of a family line of pieces.
So it's a family line of pieces. So we our best guess is that this suite here of the 4 shields, this was in the casket, these were all in the casket. The Valentine there was in the casket, the little purse was in the casket, the gloves in the nutshell were in the casket. This wasn't in Elizabeth Hall's casket, but it was in one of her families. So I bought another casket from the same family, which is worked in the 1720s.
Really?
Yeah, and that was in that casket, and that was prior to, but it was completely broken up. It was broken up, but that was in that casket. So it came from exactly the same source, same family.
Right. Are you
but wasn't actually
supposing
in.
that possibly two different cousins or sisters, etc., may have worked it, or the same individual may have worked them?
Oh. If I could travel back in time, I could answer that question. I suspect it may well have been. It might even have the second casket might even have been Elizabeth's sister's offspring, but I don't know.
That's right.
You know, there's no way of answering that.
Were there any samplers in the grouping?
There weren't any early samplers in the grouping. The samplers come in. These 5 samplers here were all also in the casket.
Oh my God!
Dating from the 1780s through to about 1815.
How wonderful that a family was able to keep things together for so long. Although kind of sad that they're no longer in the family, but it happens.
I think the family realised the importance of the group, and they wanted it to be conserved and protected and looked after, and that was part of the deal. I promised them that I would publish the collection at some point before it was either dispersed or sold as you know. And these objects here were also all in the casket. So unfortunately at this point they start to name a few things. So the pin basket there, that's worked by Anna Hall in 1731. That's her needle case in 1731. We believe that this is also her work. This is later. This is about 1780 and was given to the family. And we know that because there was a note which was attached to it saying that this was given to the family, and it's just a little love token.
Stresses the importance for those of us who are working embroidery today to put names, initials, stories, pieces of paper, things like that with things, especially those who are doing reproduction samplers.
Absolutely,
I always try to tell people to embroider their name at the bottom in cream. You know, if they don't want to disturb the look of the sampler, but put their name and the date and all of that, so that it's known.
It's absolutely. And then this piece here, this little letter or card case, is worked by Anna Warner, who is contemporaneous with Elizabeth Hall.
Okay.
But from a different branch of the family. So that was obviously passed down through Anna Hall and then added to the basket. So that's that. Then these pieces, all the baby clothes, and indeed not a baby coat, but the caps, were also all in the casket, and they date from about 1740. 2 of them contain the initials of Sarah Shepherd, who is a descendant of the family, and she's born in 1741. And in 1851, they were lent to an exhibition by a subsequent descendant. And at that point in 1851, she describes them as being about 100 years old. And there's a little note to say when she lends them to the exhibition. So we've got a pretty tight timeline for these objects. And obviously with the baby clothes, these were made for Sarah Shepherd. And some of them still have got the original iron marks in them. So they were purchased and clearly never worn, never used. So 2 of them contain those iron marks, which I've never seen before. But the Holy Point lace on them is just
incredibly fine material.
Fine.
We just almost can't make this anymore.
No,
it's incredible.
And then there were these also in the box, which are at what point they fit in, I'm not sure, sort of from the 18th century through to the early 19th century, with just the little designs that she's drawn and patterns and tiny little samples of darning.
Wow. What an amazing, amazing collection. Thank you so much for giving us a view upon it.
So I hope you enjoyed my poorly filmed interview with Rebecca Scott. I promise to do better in future videos, but I think everybody would be a little distracted with that kind of amazing material samplers and embroideries around you. So if you like this, Travels with Tricia, please subscribe.